What you're looking at isn't just a traffic jam, it's the visual embodiment of an empire choking. That endless metallic serpent coiling across the Kazakh steppe marks the precise moment Vladimir Putin's final trade artery was crushed. This was Russia's last overland bridge to China, the logistical vein keeping its war machine alive. And now, one of Moscow's oldest allies has severed it, decisively and without warning. The revelation, first exposed in Forbes on October 15, 2025, ignited shockwaves far beyond Central Asia. The crisis wasn't born of mere paperwork disputes or customs delays. According to the Russian business daily Kommersant, over 2,500 trucks now sit stranded between Kazakhstan and Russia. Other local accounts push that number past 7,000, all immobilized in an endless gridlock of dust, despair, and lost profit. Each truck carries cargo critical to Russia's economy and military, the tools, technology, and micro-components keeping Putin's invasion alive. Now they're trapped in no man's land. For decades, Kazakhstan was the Kremlin's dependable partner, a key pillar of the Eurasian Economic Union and the CSTO, often described as Moscow's extended arm into Central Asia. So what drove this once loyal ally to slam the gates shut on its so-called eternal friend? To grasp the motive, we must dissect both the cargo and the quiet revolution unfolding in Astana. This crisis began in mid-September 2025, when Kazakhstan's customs authorities abruptly tightened border inspections on Chinese freight bound for Russia. Overnight, shipments that once glided through in hours were subjected to exhaustive scrutiny, endless document checks, newly enforced risk analyses, and sudden claims of non-compliance. What began as a slowdown quickly morphed into paralysis. Cargo spoiled, drivers slept in their cabs for weeks, and entire logistics chains broke down. Yet it wasn't what Kazakhstan was checking that mattered. It was what it was deliberately holding back. Beneath the stacks of consumer goods sat a far more sensitive trove: high-grade electronics, chips, sensors, processors, optical parts, alloys, CNC tools, and compact batteries, the backbone of modern weaponry. These were the dual-use materials Moscow had been importing through Kazakhstan to dodge Western sanctions. The microbrains guiding missiles, the servos driving drones, the circuits animating tanks. By stalling this trade, Astana wasn't just slowing shipments, it was surgically cutting off the neural pathways of Russia's defense industry. A senior logistics manager told Lenta.ru, "This is not a glitch, it's a new reality." Others echoed his despair. One compared the shutdown to a wall we never saw coming. Their pleas to both Moscow and Astana were ignored. Kazakhstan had made its choice, and it wouldn't be reversed. This wasn't a bureaucratic incident, it was geopolitical surgery, the most visible sign yet of the collapse of Putin's 20-year-old doctrine of near-abroad dominance. Under President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, Kazakhstan has been methodically repositioning itself, trading its historical subservience to Moscow for new alliances stretching westward and eastward, but carefully avoiding the Kremlin's orbit. Tying Kazakhstan's future to Russia now meant economic suicide. The war in Ukraine, coupled with unprecedented Western sanctions, turned Russia into a collapsing black hole, pulling its allies down with it. Tokayev's answer is the Trans-Caspian International Transport Corridor, the Middle Corridor, a new trade route linking China to Europe via the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, completely bypassing Russian soil. Billions are being poured into new ports at Aktau and Kurik, and the modernization of rail networks connecting Kazakhstan with both Europe and China. Crucially, the funding no longer comes from Moscow, but from Washington, Brussels, and Beijing. A $600 million partnership between Wabtec, an American rail giant, and Kazakhstan Temir Zholi, the state railway company, marks a milestone in this transition. By switching from Russian to international rail standards, Kazakhstan isn't just modernizing, it's symbolically detaching itself from Moscow's infrastructure and, by extension, its geopolitical control. This transformation terrifies the Kremlin. For Putin, the Middle Corridor represents more than lost transit fees. It's the erosion of Russia's relevance. For centuries, control of trade routes gave Moscow leverage over its neighbors. Now, those neighbors are building a Eurasia where Russia isn't even on the map. The blockade at the border, then, isn't just an accident. It's a message. Our road no longer passes through you, and the timing couldn't be worse for Moscow. Since the start of 2025, Russia has faced a crippling energy meltdown. Ukrainian drone strikes have torched major refineries, forcing Moscow to impose emergency bans on fuel exports, even to its allies. This triggered fuel shortages and civil unrest across Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, all of which depend on Russian energy. The once feared Big Brother now exports instability instead of oil. In parallel, the spectacle of Russia's ongoing humiliation in Ukraine has shattered whatever faith Central Asian leaders still had in the Kremlin's strength. For 3 years, they've watched an army once called invincible grind itself to pieces. To hitch their future to a sinking empire now seems suicidal. The new survival instinct is clear. Abandon ship while there's still time. Kazakhstan's defiance goes even deeper. Its government is deliberately reducing reliance on Russia in all strategic sectors: energy, defense, and even nuclear power. When Astana announced its first-ever nuclear power plant project, everyone assumed Rosatom would win the contract automatically. Instead, Tokayev's government stunned Moscow by placing the decision in a national referendum and inviting China's CNNC, France's EDF, and South Korea's KHNP to compete against Rosatom. The message was unmistakable: Russia's monopoly is over. This is the geopolitical equivalent of a divorce, final and irreversible. If Kazakhstan can challenge Moscow even in the nuclear sector, once the Kremlin's crown jewel of influence, then Putin's grip on Central Asia is effectively broken. The result? Russia now faces a two-front logistical catastrophe. The western routes to Europe blocked by sanctions, and now the eastern passage to China sealed by Kazakhstan. The once vast trade empire has become a cul-de-sac. In the early days of the war, the Kremlin's workaround was to funnel Western goods through China and Kazakhstan. When Europe closed its ports, Astana became Moscow's last oxygen tube. For a while, the system worked. Parallel imports quietly kept Russia's factories humming. But with this latest blockade, that supply chain is dead. No chips, no sensors, no CNC machines, no lithium cells. The entire ecosystem that sustains Russia's defense industry is suffocating. Production lines are halting. Drone assembly is collapsing. Even the repair of tanks and armored vehicles is slowing. The so-called special military operation has entered its logistical endgame. And yet, from the Kremlin, silence. No retaliation, no military buildup, not even a diplomatic breakthrough. Why? Because Putin's hands are shackled. First, the Ukrainian front devours all available troops and equipment. Diverting forces toward Kazakhstan would mean weakening defenses in Ukraine, an unthinkable move for a regime already on the defensive. Second, China's shadow looms large. Beijing views Kazakhstan as a critical node in its Belt and Road Initiative. Any Russian aggression there would not only jeopardize the project, but directly anger China, Moscow's last remaining lifeline in global trade. Isolated from the West and dependent on Beijing's goodwill, Putin can't afford that confrontation. Third, domestic unrest. Years of sanctions and mobilization have stretched Russia's population to the breaking point. A new foreign crisis could spark rebellion, particularly among the millions of ethnic Kazakhs and Central Asians living within Russia's borders. So the Kremlin swallows its fury. Putin, once the master of swift vengeance, now watches helplessly as his empire unravels in silence. His 20-year project to dominate the post-Soviet sphere is collapsing, not through war, but through abandonment. Those miles of idling trucks are more than stranded cargo. They're the funeral procession of Russian influence. Kazakhstan's blockade doesn't just cut supply chains, it cuts the narrative thread of Putin's imperial dream. The last bridge between Russia and China has been torched by the very partner who once swore eternal loyalty. The convoy in the steppe is more than metal and dust. It's history folding in on itself, the empire's arteries turning to stone, and the world watching as the machinery of war runs out of breath. This is not just the end of a trade route. This is the moment an empire realizes it has no roads left to run.